Yeah, a really common thing that I get from patients, even on the phone consults, is, I never used to have a problem with food when I was a kid or when I was younger, and now I can't eat X, Y, or Z. Super, super common. When it comes to food allergies and food sensitivities, food allergies are typically a much quicker response. The response or the reaction is usually within 3 hours of exposure. Now, obviously, like, most food allergies are going to be much more quick than that, like within a couple minutes of exposure, especially like your peanut allergies and shellfish allergies, those kind of things. But some symptoms may be as subtle as, a rash or a hive or a runny nose or things like that. And that's, food allergies are more IgE mediated, which is an immunoglobulin that responds to allergens. In terms of food sensitivities, though, you could get exposed or eat a food now, and you might not react for 3 hours up to 3 weeks after exposure. And that's really, really hard to food journal, and it's really, really hard even on an elimination diet perspective to try to figure these things out sometimes if your reaction is that delayed. If your reaction's only, maybe 3 hours to 2 days, then elimination diet, maybe you can figure that out, easier than someone that has a much more delayed reaction. So the biggest thing we can do there is we can test. We can test these pathways and we can test that, they have the technology to do this now. Another thing I wanted to add is you can still have a GI, response or symptom shortly after you eat, and it may not be related to a food allergy or food sensitivity. For example, if someone has too much fiber, right, or say they have a smoothie, or say they have a steak, right, whatever they're eating, you can definitely have a reaction in the gut. For example, if I had, steak, if I don't have enough stomach acid, maybe it feels like that steak is just, stuck right there. Maybe I'm eating fiber and I have dysbiosis and it's feeding, even though it's a healthy form of carbohydrate and fiber, maybe it's feeding, the dysbiosis or the overgrowth of bacteria yeast, and maybe it's promoting its own gas and giving me bloating. So you can have a lot of digestive symptoms still, even outside of the food allergies and food sensitivities. What I think is happening here is leaky gut. If that gut wall is intact, right? If it's intact and the barrier is intact, then maybe you don't have as much of these responses early on. But as time goes on, right, and it's just these slow, subtle changes over time. Sometimes they're more aggressive and quick, but these slow, subtle changes over time can sometimes be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then all of a sudden, boom! It's kind of like you're driving with your car and the tires got very little tread left on it, and you can get from point A to point B just fine, and all of a sudden, tire blows, and then you can't. Same kind of concept. Or someone that has a disc herniation, right, in their back, and they've never felt it before, and all of a sudden one day they bend over to tie their shoes. Well, that wasn't that one moment that did it, right? It was hundreds of thousands of movements that led up to that disc to degenerate, which then created that problem in that moment in time. So that's usually, in my opinion, what happens, right? It's a straw that breaks the camel's back. Sometimes it can happen post-infectious, right? It all happened after food poisoning. Ever since then, I can't eat anything. Oh, I got influenza. I got a gut bug. And ever since then, I've been more sensitive to foods. So you can have more of an acute situation too, where it creates this, dysbiosis or this leaky gut phenomenon, where then we get these food sensitivities. Or it can be genetic, right? For example, with gluten, this is a common one I get. I could eat gluten. I could eat whatever I wanted. Never had a problem. Now I can't eat it. Well, a lot of us are genetically predisposed to gluten sensitivity. And when that gene turns on, right, then a lot of times we start having problems. And that gene turns on because of our environment, right? This can be stress, this can be exposure, this can be toxins, this can be any reason for that gene to turn on. Once that gene turns on, then you can have inflammation when you eat it or symptoms when you eat it. But the beauty of genetics is when we avoid that food and change our environment, the genetic expression can change, and that's called epigenetics, which then makes us feel a lot better.